The autumn wind swept across the vast plains of Wyoming Territory, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. The year was 1882, and the land stretched endlessly beneath a sky so wide it could swallow a man's troubles whole, or magnify them until they crushed his spirit entirely. Here, where the Rocky Mountains cast their long shadows across golden grasslands, the earth was both beautiful and merciless. Sarah Winkeeper lived at the edge of this unforgiving world, in a weathered canvas tent reinforced with timber scraps she'd salvaged from an abandoned wagon. The dwelling sat where the prairie met the pine forest, far enough from the town of Copper Ridge to avoid most trouble, yet close enough to walk when she needed work. At 23, she had survived more winters alone than she cared to count. The morning sun painted the frost-covered grass in shades of copper and gold as Sarah emerged from her tent, water bucket in hand. Her dark hair, woven into a single braid, caught the light as she moved with practiced quiet toward the stream. The cold bit through her thin wool shawl, a cast-off from the minister's wife. But she'd known worse, much worse. 5 years had passed since the spotted fever took her parents and younger brother. The disease had swept through the Shoshone camps like wildfire, leaving too many graves and too few to mourn them. Sarah had survived, though sometimes in the depths of winter nights. She wondered if that was blessing or curse. The illness had left her weakened for months, and by the time she'd recovered, the world had moved on without her. In Copper Ridge, she was neither fully accepted nor entirely shunned. The townspeople needed her skills. She could mend clothing with tiny, perfect stitches, prepare herbs that eased pain, and work harder than most men when hauling water or chopping wood. But needing someone and welcoming them were different things entirely. That Indian girl, they called her, though she had a name, wild-looking thing. The proper ladies whispered behind gloved hands when she passed. Pretty enough, I suppose, in that savage way. Sarah had learned to keep her eyes down, to make herself small and quiet. She'd learned that invisibility was a kind of armor, though it chafed worse than any rope. The day had been long and thankless. Mrs. Henderson had hired her to help with laundry, a mountain of sheets and clothing that left Sarah's hands raw and her back aching. The pay was half what a white woman would earn, but Sarah took it without complaint. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. As darkness began to creep across the sky, she made her way back from town, her meager earnings tucked safely in the small leather pouch at her waist. The moon was new, leaving only starlight to guide her path along the rutted trail. She knew every stone, every dip and rise, having walked this route countless times. The sound of horses made her freeze. 3 riders emerged from the shadows near the old cottonwood grove, their forms dark against the lighter sky. Sarah's heart hammered as she recognized them. Cowboys from the Double Bar Ranch, young men who spent their wages on whiskey and their free time looking for trouble. "Well, well," drawled the one in front. Tommy Morrison. She knew him by reputation, quick with his fists and quicker with cruel words. "Look what we found wandering in the dark." "Bet she's been stealing," said another. Jake Sullivan, his words slurred with drink. "That's what her kind does, ain't it?" Sarah stood still as a deer sensing wolves. Running would only excite them, like blood in the water. "I'm just going home," she said quietly, hating how her voice trembled. "I've done nothing wrong." Tommy dismounted, his spurs jangling in the quiet night. "Maybe we should check that pouch of yours. Make sure it ain't filled with stolen goods." The other 2 laughed, ugly sounds that made her skin crawl. They dismounted too, forming a loose circle around her. The smell of whiskey was strong enough to make her stomach turn. "Please," Sarah said, taking a step back. "I worked for Mrs. Henderson today. She'll tell you." "Mrs. Henderson ain't here," Jake interrupted, moving closer. "And we all know how you Indian women earn your keep when decent work runs dry." The insult burned, but fear was stronger than anger. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the small knife at her belt. Her father's, one of the few things she had left of him. It wouldn't do much against 3 men, but that's enough. The voice came from the darkness beyond the cottonwoods, deep and calm, with an edge of steel beneath. A rider emerged, and even in the starlight, Sarah could see he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "This ain't your concern, mister," Tommy said, though his voice had lost some of its swagger. The stranger rode closer, and Sarah caught a glimpse of his face, weathered and strong-jawed, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. 3 armed men surrounding a lone woman in the dark? I'm making it my concern. "You don't know what she is," Jake protested. "She's just a—" "I know what I see," the man interrupted. His hand rested casually on the Winchester across his saddle, the gesture speaking louder than words. "And what I see is 3 men who've had too much whiskey and too little sense. Time you boys headed back to the double bar." For a moment, the night held its breath. Sarah could feel the violence hovering like a storm about to break. Then Tommy spat in the dirt and turned toward his horse. "This ain't over," he muttered, though he kept his voice low. "Come on, boys." They mounted up and rode off, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the distance. Sarah remained frozen, unsure whether this new stranger represented salvation or simply a different kind of danger. The man dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 40, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, maintaining a respectful distance. Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. "My name's Samuel Carter," he said. "I own the Broken Wheel Ranch, about 10 miles north of here." He studied her with eyes that seemed kind, though Sarah had learned not to trust kindness too quickly. "It's not safe for you to walk alone in the dark. May I see you home?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I live just past the forest edge. It's not far. Then I'll walk with you, if you'll permit it. I'll lead my horse. Wouldn't be proper otherwise." The unexpected consideration made something tight in her chest loosen just a fraction. Most men wouldn't think twice about propriety when it came to an Indian woman. They walked in silence at first, Samuel leading his bay gelding while maintaining a careful distance from her. The night sounds gradually returned, an owl calling from the pines, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. "Those boys give you trouble often?" he asked eventually. "Sometimes." Sarah kept her answer short, wary of saying too much. "I'll have a word with their foreman. Tom Morrison's got no business hassling women, regardless of—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Regardless of anything." The trail narrowed as they entered the edge of the forest, and Sarah found herself stealing glances at this unusual man. His clothes were well made but practical, his boots worn but carefully maintained. Everything about him spoke of quiet competence and self-sufficiency. When they reached her tent, Samuel stopped abruptly, taking in the meager shelter. Sarah saw it through his eyes, the patched canvas, the scattered belongings she tried to keep neat, the pitiful cook fire ring. Shame flooded through her, hot and bitter. "This is where you live." His voice held no judgment, only surprise and something that might have been concern. "It's enough," she said defensively. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I was bringing this back from town for my supper, but I ate at the hotel instead. No sense letting good food go to waste." He set the bundle on a flat stone near her tent and stepped back immediately. The smell of fresh bread and dried beef made her stomach clench with hunger. She'd eaten nothing since morning. "Thank you," she managed, though pride made the words difficult. Samuel touched the brim of his hat. "I'll be heading back now. You take care, Miss—" "Sarah," she said softly. "Sarah Windkeeper." "Miss Windkeeper." He said her name with the same respect he'd use for any white woman, and something inside her cracked just a little. "I meant what I said about those boys. They won't bother you again if I have anything to say about it." He mounted his horse and looked down at her, his face shadowed, but his voice warm. Nobody should have to live in fear. Nobody. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness, leaving Sarah standing alone with a bundle of food and a confusion of emotions she couldn't name. She picked up the bundle with trembling hands and retreated into her tent. Inside, she unwrapped the cloth to find fresh bread, dried beef, and even a small wrapped portion of cheese, luxuries she hadn't tasted in months. As she ate slowly, savoring each bite, tears ran down her face. She couldn't have said whether they were from relief, exhaustion, or the unexpected kindness of a stranger who'd looked at her and seen a woman worth protecting. Through the tent's entrance, she could see the stars wheeling overhead, constant and unchanging. But something in her world had shifted tonight, subtle as a change in the wind. For the first time in years, someone had stood between her and harm, asking nothing in return. Sarah touched her father's knife at her belt, remembering his words. The Great Spirit sends help in many forms. Daughter, sometimes as the eagle, sometimes as the mouse. Keep your eyes open and your heart ready. She'd stopped believing those words after the fever took him, but tonight, in the darkness of her lonely shelter, she wondered if perhaps she'd been wrong to lose faith so completely. Samuel Carter might simply be a decent man who'd happened along at the right moment, or he might be something more. Time would tell. It always did. As she lay down on her thin blanket, stomach full for the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself a moment of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. It was a dangerous thing for someone in her position, but tonight she was too tired to guard against it. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. But tonight, she was safe, fed, and someone had spoken her name with respect. Sometimes, that was enough. The encounter with Samuel Carter haunted Sarah's thoughts for 3 days. She went about her work, mending clothes for the minister's wife, helping at the general store when they needed extra hands. But her mind kept returning to that moment in the darkness, the respect in his voice when he'd said her name, the way he'd stood between her and danger without hesitation. On the 4th evening, as purple shadows stretched across the prairie, she heard the sound of a single horse approaching. Her body tensed automatically, hand moving toward her father's knife, but she recognized the rider's silhouette against the fading light. Samuel Carter sat his bay gelding with that same easy grace, though something in his posture seemed hesitant. "Miss Windkeeper," he called out from a respectful distance. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to check that you've had no more trouble." Sarah emerged from her tent, smoothing her patched skirt with nervous hands. "No trouble," she said softly. "Thank you for asking." He dismounted but stayed by his horse, hat in his hands. In the better light, she could see his face more clearly, weathered by sun and wind, with deep lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. His eyes were gray like winter sky, kind but carrying shadows of their own. "I've been thinking," he began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. "That is, it occurred to me, winter's coming on fast. That tent won't hold against the snow we get in these parts." Sarah lifted her chin. "I have survived winters before." "I don't doubt it," he said quickly. "You strike me as someone who survived a great deal, but—" He twisted his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed oddly vulnerable from such a self-assured man. "I find myself in need of help at the ranch. My cook quit last month, and I've been making do, but badly. The hands are starting to complain about my biscuits." She studied him warily. Men had offered her work before, usually with intentions that had nothing to do with cooking or cleaning. Samuel seemed to read her thoughts. "It's honest work I'm offering. Miss Windkeeper, room and board, fair wages. My foreman Jim Douglas and his wife Mary live on the property. She could use help with the household work too. You wouldn't be alone with just men around." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you offer this to me?" He was quiet for a moment, gazing out over the darkening prairie. "My wife died 6 years ago. Consumption. I nursed her through it, watched her fade away little by little." His voice roughened. "Afterward, I learned what it means to be alone. Really alone. Nobody should have to face winter in a tent. Not when there's honest work to be done and a warm roof standing empty. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to accept, desperately wanted to, but fear held her back. The people in town, they won't like it. An Indian woman working in your house. The people in town don't run my ranch, Samuel said firmly. Never have, never will. I need to think about it. She managed. Of course. He mounted his horse, then looked down at her with those steady gray eyes. The offer stands. Whenever you're ready. You know where the Broken Wheel is? She nodded. Everyone knew the Broken Wheel, one of the larger spreads in the territory, well-run and prosperous. After he left, Sarah sat by her small fire, staring into the flames. Her practical mind cataloged all the reasons to accept. Shelter from winter, steady wages, protection from men like Tommy Morrison. But her heart whispered warnings about trusting too quickly, about the pain of having something good only to lose it. That night, the first snow began to fall. Soft flakes at first, then heavier, until by morning a thin white blanket covered the ground. Sarah woke shivering, her breath visible in the cold air inside the tent. Ice had formed on the inside of the canvas where her breath had condensed. She lasted 2 more days. On the 3rd morning, she woke to find snow had collapsed part of her tent. Her meager belongings were soaked, her firewood too wet to light. Her hands were so numb she could barely feel them as she tried to repair the damage. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not anymore. Sarah packed what little she owned into a canvas bag, doused her failed fire, and began the long walk to the Broken Wheel Ranch. The snow wasn't deep yet, but the wind cut through her thin shawl like a blade. By the time she saw the ranch buildings in the distance, she was trembling so hard she could barely walk. The main house was built of solid logs, with real glass windows and smoke rising invitingly from 2 chimneys. Barns and outbuildings spread around it, all well maintained. A few ranch hands moved between the buildings, but they were too far away to pay her any notice. Sarah approached the front door, then hesitated. In her experience, Indians used the back door, if they were allowed inside at all. She was standing there, frozen with indecision and cold. When the door opened, Samuel filled the doorway, and relief washed over his face when he saw her. "Good Lord, you're half frozen. Come in immediately." He ushered her inside before she could protest, into a warmth that made her skin sting as feeling returned. The interior was simple but comfortable. Handmade furniture, a large stone fireplace, clean floors, and windows with actual curtains. "Mary," Samuel called out. "Mrs. Douglas." A woman appeared from what must be the kitchen, plump and middle-aged, with graying hair and a practical bun and kind eyes behind wire spectacles. She took one look at Sarah and immediately went into motion. "Poor child, you're blue with cold. Sam, put more wood on that fire. I'll get blankets and hot coffee." She bustled off without waiting for a response. Samuel guided Sarah to a chair near the fireplace. "When did you last eat?" Sarah tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She managed to shake her head. Mary Douglas returned with an armload of blankets and wrapped them around Sarah with practiced efficiency. "Men," she muttered, though her tone was fond. "Standing around asking questions when what's needed is doing." She pressed a cup of hot coffee into Sarah's hands. "Drink this slowly, dear. Let it warm you from the inside." The coffee was strong and sweet, better than anything Sarah had tasted in years. As warmth seeped back into her body, embarrassment followed. Here she sat in Samuel Carter's fine house, dripping melted snow on his floor, looking like the desperate, poverty-stricken creature she was. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have—" "None of that," Mary interrupted firmly. "Sam told us you might be coming. I've got the room off the kitchen all ready. It's small but private, with its own door to the outside if you prefer. Used to be the summer kitchen before we built the addition." Samuel had moved to stand by the window, giving her space while staying close enough to show concern. "The work is real," he said quietly. "Mary needs help with the house, and the hands need someone who can cook for more than just sustenance. The pay is $20 a month plus room and board." $20. It was fair wages, exactly what a white woman would earn. Sarah's hands tightened on the coffee cup. "There are 12 hands who eat in the bunkhouse," Mary added, sitting down across from her. "They're good men, mostly, respectful. My Jim keeps them in line. You'd cook their meals, help me with the main house, tend the kitchen garden come spring. It's hard work, but honest." "What about—" Sarah struggled to voice her fear. "What will people say about you having an Indian woman here?" Samuel turned from the window, his face set in hard lines. "Let them say what they will. This is my land, my home. I hire who I choose. There may be some talk at first," Mary admitted honestly. "But once folks see you're a good Christian woman doing honest work, most will come around. And those who don't," she shrugged, "their opinions don't put food on my table or yours." Sarah looked between them, Samuel with his quiet strength and wounded eyes, Mary with her practical kindness. They were offering her more than work. They were offering her a chance at dignity, at belonging somewhere, even if only as a hired hand. "I accept," she said, the words barely above a whisper. Then stronger, "I accept your offer." "Thank you." Mary smiled warmly. "Wonderful. Now, let's get you properly warm and fed. Then I'll show you your room. Tomorrow is soon enough to start learning your duties." As Mary led her toward the kitchen, Sarah glanced back at Samuel. He stood by the fireplace now, and for just a moment, their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Two souls who had known loss, who understood what it meant to be alone in a crowded world. "Thank you," she said again, putting all her gratitude into the simple words. Samuel nodded, his weathered face softening. "Welcome to the Broken Wheel, Miss Windkeeper. I hope you'll find some peace here." Peace? Sarah had almost forgotten what that word meant. As she followed Mary into the warm kitchen, filled with a sense of bread and stew, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she might remember. The room Mary showed her was indeed small, but it was clean and dry, with a real bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Sarah set her few possessions on the dresser and sat on the bed, overwhelmed. After years of struggling alone, she had walls around her, warmth and work that would earn her respect. Through the window, snow continued to fall, but now it seemed beautiful rather than threatening, somewhere in this house. Samuel Carter went about his evening, having once again changed her life with his unexpected kindness. Sarah didn't understand why he'd helped her, not truly, but as she lay down on the first real bed she'd slept in since her parents died, she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever spirits had guided her here. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning her duties, proving herself worthy of this chance, navigating whatever complications arose from her presence here. But tonight, she was warm, safe, and no longer alone. For now. That was miracle enough. Sarah had been at the Broken Wheel for 2 weeks when the trouble began. She'd settled into a routine, rising before dawn to start breakfast for the ranch hands, working alongside Mary Douglas through the day, falling into exhausted sleep each night in her small, warm room. The men had been wary at first, but her good cooking and quiet ways had won over most of them. Even Jim Douglas, Mary's cautious husband, had gruffly pronounced her biscuits better than anything we've had in years. The peace shattered on a Tuesday morning when she accompanied Mary to town for supplies. Sarah kept her eyes down as they entered Morrison's general store, hoping to avoid notice. But Helena Morrison, the owner's wife and Tommy's mother, spotted her immediately. "Mary Douglas." Helena's voice cut through the store like a whip. "What are you thinking? Bringing that creature in here?" Mary's spine straightened. "Sarah is helping me shop for the ranch. She has as much right to be here as anyone." "Right?" Helena's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Indians have no rights in decent establishments. You should know better." Other women had gathered, drawn by the prospect of drama. Sarah recognized several: Mrs. Henderson, who had hired her for laundry, the banker's wife, the minister's wife who had given her the old shawl. It's unseemly. Mrs. Whitmore, the banker's wife, added. That poor Mr. Carter, still grieving his dear wife, and now this woman has clearly taken advantage of his loneliness. She's bewitched him, someone whispered. You know how their kind are with their heathen ways. Sarah's hands clenched in her skirts, but she kept her head down, making herself small. She'd heard worse. She could endure this, but Mary Douglas had reached her limit. That's enough, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Sarah Windkeeper is a good Christian woman who works harder than any two people I know. She cooks, cleans, and tends to her duties without complaint, which is more than I can say for some who stand here gossiping instead of minding their own homes. How dare you? Helena began. I dare because it's true, Mary interrupted. And if you refuse to serve us, we'll take the Broken Wheel's considerable business elsewhere. Fort Laramie isn't so far that we can't make the trip. The threat hung in the air. The Broken Wheel was one of the largest ranches in the area, their business significant. Helena's face flushed red, but she gestured sharply to her husband to fill their order. They completed their shopping in tense silence. Sarah could feel the eyes boring into her back, could hear the whispers following them. As they loaded the wagon, she whispered, I'm sorry, Mrs. Douglas, I've caused you trouble. The only trouble here is small-minded people with too much time on their hands, Mary said firmly. But Sarah saw the worry in her eyes. Word traveled fast in a small town. By evening, Samuel had heard about the incident. Sarah was scrubbing the kitchen floor when she heard raised voices from the main room. Jim Douglas reporting what had happened, his tone grim. It'll be bad for business, boss. Jim was saying, Helena Morrison's got a tongue like a rattlesnake and twice as poisonous. She'll have half the territory believing we're harboring some kind of impropriety. Let her talk. Samuel's voice was cold as winter wind. The Broken Wheel doesn't bow to gossip. It's not just gossip I'm worried about. Jim replied, Tommy Morrison and his friends have been making threats, saying they'll teach the Indian girl her place if you won't. Sarah's hand stilled on the brush. Through the doorway, she could see Samuel's face harden into something dangerous. They're welcome to try, he said quietly. But they'll answer to me if they set foot on this property with ill intent. Later that evening, Sarah was gathering eggs from the henhouse when Samuel appeared. He rarely sought her out directly, usually maintaining a careful, proper distance. But tonight, his face was troubled. I heard what happened in town, he said without preamble. I'm sorry you were subjected to that. It's not your fault, Sarah said, not meeting his eyes. I knew what would happen. I tried to tell you. Stop. His voice was firm but kind. You warned me people would talk. Yes, but that doesn't make their behavior right. And it doesn't mean you should accept it. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I want you to know, if you're uncomfortable, if you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll give you wages enough to get somewhere safe. Maybe California where... No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Sarah finally looked at him, seeing the genuine concern in his gray eyes. I mean, thank you, but no, I won't be driven away by cruel words. I've heard worse and survived. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, and something deeper. You're stronger than most give you credit for. I've had to be, she said simply. They stood there in the fading light, the air between them charged with unspoken understanding. Then Samuel cleared his throat and stepped back. Jim will be keeping a closer eye on things, he said. And I've made it clear to the hands that you're under the protection of the Broken Wheel. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me. Protection. The word wrapped around her like a warm blanket. When had anyone last offered to protect her? Mr. Carter, she said softly. Why are you doing this? Really? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if seeing something beyond the henhouse and the gathering dusk. My wife Ellen, she was from back east, delicate, refined. This land was hard on her. She tried to love it for my sake. but it wore her down, made her sick. He looked at Sarah directly. "You're nothing like her, but when I saw you that night, facing down those men with just courage and a small knife, refusing to bow or break, I thought maybe I could do one right thing. Maybe I could keep one person from being crushed by the hardness of this place." Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm not delicate or refined." "No," Samuel agreed. And for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled, just slightly, but genuine. "You're something better. You're a survivor, and the broken wheel needs survivors." He touched his hat and turned to go, then paused. "Miss Windkeeper, Sarah, you should know that I've spoken to Reverend Mason. He's agreed to make it clear in Sunday's sermon that Christian charity extends to all God's children, regardless of birth. He owes me some favors." After he left, Sarah stood in the gathering darkness, holding the basket of eggs and feeling something dangerous bloom in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. Samuel Carter saw her not as something exotic or savage, not as an object of pity or desire, but as a person worthy of respect and protection. That night, she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind howl around the corners of the house, somewhere in the main house. Samuel was probably reading by his fire, alone with memories of a delicate Eastern wife who couldn't survive this harsh land. But Sarah had survived. She'd survived disease and death, poverty and prejudice. And now, against all odds, she'd found a place where someone thought her strength was something to admire rather than fear. The next morning brought fresh snow and fresh challenges. 3 of the ranch hands quit, saying they wouldn't work at a place that employed Indians. Samuel let them go without argument, though it would mean extra work for everyone until he could hire replacements. "Good riddance," Mary muttered, watching them ride away. Anyone who judges a person by their birth rather than their character isn't worth keeping. But Sarah saw the strain in Samuel's face, the weight of standing against popular opinion. That evening, she made his favorite meal, pot roast with winter vegetables, and was rewarded with another rare smile. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes said more. As the days passed, a new rhythm developed. The remaining ranch hands, seeing Samuel's unwavering support, treated Sarah with increasing respect. A few even began to joke with her, carefully at first, then more naturally as she responded with quiet humor of her own. And Samuel began to join them in the kitchen for the evening meal instead of eating alone in the dining room. He spoke more, sharing stories of the ranch's early days, asking Mary about her grandchildren, and occasionally asking Sarah about her knowledge of herbs and healing. "My mother was a healer," Sarah told him one evening as she prepared a poultice for a hand's injured shoulder. "She taught me to read the plants, to know which ones hurt and which ones heal. Valuable knowledge out here," Samuel said, watching her work with interest. "Maybe you could teach Mary and me. Never know when it might come in handy." It was such a simple thing, the acknowledgement that she had knowledge worth sharing, but it warmed Sarah more than the fire ever could. The storm clouds were gathering. She knew Tommy Morrison and his kind wouldn't give up easily, and the town's gossips would keep spinning their tales. But for now, in this kitchen filled with warmth and acceptance, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten existed. She belonged somewhere, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to belong to someone. Winter had settled over the broken wheel like a heavy blanket, transforming the ranch into a world of white and gray. Sarah had been there nearly 2 months now, and the rhythms of ranch life had become as natural to her as breathing. She rose before dawn to start the bread, worked through the day with steady purpose, and fell asleep each night feeling something she hadn't experienced in years: contentment. The ranch hands who had stayed were good men. Old Pete, the horse wrangler, had begun teaching her about the different breeds and their temperaments. Young Danny, barely 18, shyly brought her wildflowers he found in the sheltered valleys. Even taciturn Red Murphy had warmed to her, declaring her stew good enough to make a man forget his troubles. But it was the evenings that had become precious to her. After supper, when the dishes were done and Mary had retired to her cottage, Samuel had taken to lingering in the kitchen. At first, he'd made excuses, reviewing the next day's work, checking supplies. But gradually, the pretense had fallen away. "My wife used to read to me in the evenings," he said one night, staring into his coffee cup. "Poetry, mostly. Wordsworth and Byron. Things I didn't much understand, but liked hearing in her voice." Sarah continued mending a torn shirt, her needle moving in steady rhythm. My mother sang. She offered quietly. Songs from her grandmother, old stories set to music. I remember falling asleep to them. "Do you still remember any?" She glanced up, finding his gray eyes warm with interest. "Some, but they're in Shoshone. You wouldn't understand the words." "Understanding isn't always necessary," Samuel said. "Sometimes just the sound is enough." So she sang, softly at first, a lullaby about stars guiding lost children home. Her voice was untrained but true, carrying the melody her mother had taught her. When she finished, Samuel was very still. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." These moments of connection were becoming more frequent, more dangerous. Sarah found herself listening for his footsteps, saving the best portions of food for his plate, noticing how the firelight caught the silver in his hair. She tried to push these feelings down, knowing the impossibility of them. He was her employer, a respected rancher. She was a Shoshone woman working in his kitchen. The divide between them was wider than the prairie itself. But sometimes, when their hands accidentally touched as she served his coffee, or when he smiled that rare, genuine smile, she allowed herself to dream. One afternoon, as Sarah worked in the kitchen garden, coaxing the last hardy vegetables from the near-frozen ground, she heard riders approaching. Her body tensed instinctively, but these weren't the harsh voices of troublemakers. Samuel appeared around the corner of the house, accompanied by a man she didn't recognize, older, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone important. "Sarah," Samuel called. "This is Judge Thornton from Cheyenne. He's staying for dinner. Could you prepare something special?" "Of course, Mr. Carter," she replied, keeping her eyes properly downcast. But the judge surprised her. "Miss Windkeeper, is it? Sam's told me about your skill with herbs. My wife suffers terribly from headaches. I wonder if you might have any advice." Sarah glanced at Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. "There's willow bark tea that can help," she said carefully, "and feverfew. If you can find it, I could prepare some mixtures for you to take to her." "I'd be most grateful," the judge said warmly. "It's rare to find someone with real knowledge of healing herbs out here." That evening, as she served dinner, Sarah couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "You've caused quite a stir, Sam," the judge was saying. "Helena Morrison cornered me at the hotel, demanding I talk sense into you." "Helena Morrison can mind her own business," Samuel replied curtly. "I don't disagree, but you should know there's talk of trying to pass ordinances limiting where Indians can work and live. Harold Morrison's got the ear of several territorial legislators." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, but she kept her face carefully neutral. "Let them try," Samuel said, his voice hard. "I'll fight it in court if I have to. A man should be free to hire whoever he pleases on his own land." "And if it's not just about hiring?" the judge asked carefully. "Sam, I've known you since Ellen passed. You've been alone too long. If there's more to this situation, there's nothing improper happening under my roof," Samuel interrupted sharply. "I didn't say there was, but Sam, you're not a young man anymore. If you're thinking of finding companionship again, there are easier paths." Sarah retreated to the kitchen, her cheeks burning. She shouldn't have been listening, but the words echoed in her mind. Easier paths. Yes, there would always be easier paths than caring for a Shoshone woman. Later, after the judge had retired to the guest room, Samuel found her in the kitchen, grinding herbs for the headache remedy. "I apologize for Judge Thornton," he said without preamble. "He means well, but he doesn't understand." "There's nothing to apologize for," Sarah said, not looking up from her work. "He spoke only the truth. There are easier paths." "Sarah," Something in his voice made her look up. He stood in the doorway, his face shadowed but his eyes intense. I stopped looking for easy the day Ellen died. Easy is for men who haven't learned that life is short and precious and meant to be lived honestly. The mortar and pestle stilled in her hands. Mr. Carter, Samuel, he corrected gently. In this kitchen, when it's just us, I'd like you to call me Samuel. Samuel? She whispered, tasting the name. We both know this. Whatever this is, can only bring trouble. He moved closer, still maintaining proper distance, but near enough that she could smell the leather and wood smoke scent of him. I've been thinking about that night we met. You could have run from those men. Most would have. But you stood your ground. I was too frightened to run, she admitted. No, he said firmly. You were brave, and these past months, I've watched you face down gossip and cruelty with grace and dignity. You've brought warmth back to this house. Sarah, not just with your cooking or your work, but with your presence. Sarah's heart was racing now, hope and fear warring in her chest. People will talk more than they already do. Let them. His voice was fierce. I've spent 6 years living for other people's expectations. Living, but not really alive. Then you walked into my house half frozen, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to look forward to tomorrow. She set down the mortar, her hands shaking. I'm not Ellen. I'm not delicate or refined or... No, Samuel agreed, moving closer still. You're not Ellen. You're Sarah. You're strong and kind and real. You don't need me to protect you. You've proven that. But I find myself wanting to anyway. Wanting to give you a reason to stay that has nothing to do with wages or shelter. The kitchen was very quiet. Only the crackle of the fire and the distant wind breaking the silence. Sarah felt as if she stood on the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling or flying. I dream about you, she confessed, the words barely audible. I know I shouldn't, but I do. I dream about belonging here not as your employee, but as... She couldn't finish. Samuel's hand moved slowly, giving her time to pull away, until his fingers gently touched her cheek. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was infinitely gentle. As what? He prompted softly. As someone you could love, she whispered, tears threatening. But that's foolish. I'm not the kind of woman a man like you could love. Sarah Windkeeper, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You're exactly the kind of woman this man could love, does love, if you'll have me, despite the difficulties it will bring. The tears came then, sliding down her cheeks as years of loneliness and rejection crumbled away. Samuel pulled her gently into his arms, and she let herself be held, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. I'm frightened, she admitted against his chest. So am I, he confessed. But I'm more frightened of letting you go, of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. They stood there in the warm kitchen, holding each other as the wind howled outside. It wasn't a passionate embrace. That would come later. This was something deeper. Two wounded souls finding shelter in each other, making a choice that would change everything. When they finally stepped apart. Samuel's eyes were bright with unshed tears of his own. I won't rush you, he said. We'll take this slowly, carefully, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to make you my wife. Wife. The word hung between them like a promise and a threat. Marriage between a white man and an Indian woman wasn't illegal in Wyoming territory, but it was certainly scandalous. They would face opposition from all sides. Your reputation, she began. My reputation is my own to manage, he said firmly. The question is whether you can see a future with a stubborn old rancher who's set in his ways and comes with a ranch full of responsibilities. Sarah laughed then, surprising them both, a sound of joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. Old? You're not old, Samuel Carter. You're just seasoned, like good leather. He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face. Is that a yes to courting? It's a yes to seeing where this path leads. she said carefully, but slowly, as you said, and quietly, until we're sure. Agreed. He lifted her hand, studying her work-worn fingers. You deserve so much more than a hard life on a ranch. I've had a hard life without a ranch, Sarah pointed out. At least here, I wouldn't be alone. No, Samuel promised, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. Never alone again. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah touched her cheek where Samuel's hand had rested. Everything had changed with that simple touch, that declaration of love. The morning would bring new challenges. How to navigate this new relationship while maintaining propriety. How to face the increased scrutiny that would surely come. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of being chosen, of being seen as worthy of love. Samuel Carter, a man who could have any woman in the territory, had chosen her, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Tomorrow, she would return to being the hired help in public, maintaining the proper distance and deference. But in the quiet moments, in the kitchen after dark, she would be Sarah, and he would be Samuel, and they would build something worth fighting for. The wind had died down, leaving the ranch wrapped in peaceful silence. Through her small window, Sarah could see stars spreading across the clear sky like scattered diamonds. Her mother had believed the stars were the campfires of ancestors, watching over their descendants. Watch over us, she whispered to those distant lights. We'll need all the help we can get. Then she lay down, pulling her warm blankets around her, and, for the first time in memory, looked forward to tomorrow with more hope than fear. The fragile happiness Sarah had found at the broken wheel lasted exactly 3 weeks. During that time, she and Samuel maintained careful propriety during the day, but in the evening hours, they allowed themselves quiet moments of connection, a touch of hands while passing dishes, conversations that stretched long into the night, shared smiles that spoke of growing affection. Then Harold Morrison arrived with a delegation of townspeople. Sarah was hanging laundry when she saw the riders approaching, 6 men, all prominent citizens. Her stomach clenched with dread as she recognized not just Morrison, but also the bank president, 2 large ranch owners, and others. She quickly finished her task and slipped into the house through the back door. Samuel met them on the front porch, his stance relaxed but alert. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could hear every word. Carter, Harold Morrison began without preamble. We've come to discuss the situation with your household. There's no situation to discuss, Samuel replied evenly. But you've ridden a long way. Can I offer you gentlemen some coffee? This isn't a social call. Thomas Hartwell, the bank president, interjected. Sam, you're a respected member of this community. What you do reflects on all of us. What I do on my own land is my business, Samuel said, his tone hardening. Not when it threatens the moral fabric of our community. Morrison pressed. Having that woman here, unmarried, under your roof, it's causing talk. The kind of talk that drives away decent families, that makes our town look lawless and improper. Sarah's hands clenched in her apron. Mary Douglas appeared beside her, having heard the voices. Stay inside, dear, Mary whispered. Let Sam handle this. But Sarah could see Samuel's jaw tightening, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Miss Windkeeper is an employee of this ranch, nothing more, Samuel said coldly. She works alongside Mrs. Douglas and lives in separate quarters. There's nothing improper happening here. That's not what people are saying. Charles Bennett, who owned the neighboring Triple Creek Ranch, spoke up. Some of the hands who quit have been talking. They say you spend evenings alone with her, that you're familiar. Since when do we govern our lives by the gossip of disgruntled former employees? Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. Since that gossip affects property values and the reputation of our entire region, Hartwell replied. Sam, be reasonable. There are plenty of white women who could do the same work. Why invite scandal? Morrison stepped forward. We're here as friends. Carter, send the girl away quietly, and this all goes away. Hell, I'll even give her money for passage to California. But if you persist in this association, well, we'll have to consider measures to protect our community." "Measures?" Samuel's voice could have frozen fire. "Are you threatening me, Morrison?" "Not threatening. Warning. The Cattlemen's Association is considering new membership rules. The bank might need to review loan terms. Suppliers might find it difficult to fill orders for ranches that don't uphold community standards." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. They would destroy Samuel, slowly but surely, unless he sent her away. She turned to go to her room, to pack her few belongings, but Mary caught her arm. "Don't you dare," the older woman said fiercely. "Don't you dare let them win." On the porch, Samuel had gone very still. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who'd built his life from nothing and would not be cowed. "Gentlemen, let me be clear. Sarah Windkeeper stays as long as she chooses to stay. If the association wants to revoke my membership, so be it. If the bank wants to call in my loans, I'll pay them in full. I've got the funds. If suppliers want to lose my business, Fort Laramie will be happy to have it." He stepped forward, and even from inside, Sarah could feel the force of his anger. "But if any of you, so much as speak an unkind word to or about Miss Windkeeper, you'll answer to me personally. And Harold, if your boy Tommy comes near her again, I'll horsewhip him myself. Are we clear?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. "Finally." Morrison spat on the porch boards. "You're making a mistake, Carter, a big mistake. The only mistake I made was thinking you were decent men." Samuel replied, "Now get off my land." After they left, Samuel stood on the porch for a long moment, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he finally came inside, his face was like stone. He walked past the kitchen without a word and shut himself in his study. Sarah looked at Mary, tears flowing freely now. "I have to leave. I can't let them destroy him." "Nonsense," Mary said, but her voice lacked conviction. They both knew the power these men wielded. The broken wheel was strong, but no ranch was an island. That evening, Samuel didn't come to the kitchen after supper. Sarah waited, pretending to mend clothes, but finally gave up and went to her room. She lay awake for hours, wrestling with her conscience. Her presence was going to cost Samuel everything he'd built. How could that be love? Near midnight, she made her decision. She rose and began packing her few possessions. She would leave before dawn, take only what she'd brought with her. It would hurt Samuel, but not as much as watching his life crumble because of her. She was folding her mother's old dress when a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Samuel standing there, looking haggard in the lamplight. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly, taking in her half-packed bag. "You know I have to," she whispered. "You heard them. They'll ruin you." He stepped into the small room, closing the door behind him. It was improper, but propriety seemed a small concern now. "Do you remember," he said slowly, "what I told you about my wife? How this land wore her down?" Sarah nodded, confused by the change of subject. "What I didn't tell you was that I almost gave it up for her. She begged me to sell, to go back east where she'd be comfortable. I refused. I chose this land over her happiness." His voice was thick with old guilt. "She died here, miserable and far from everything she loved, because I was too stubborn to compromise." "Samuel, I won't make the same mistake twice," he continued. "But I also won't let fear dictate my choices. Sarah, if you want to leave because you don't care for me, because you don't see a future here, then I'll help you go. But if you're leaving because of those pompous fools and their threats..." He moved closer, his eyes intense. "Then you're taking the coward's way out. And the woman I've come to love is no coward." "You don't understand," Sarah said desperately. "They can destroy everything you've worked for." "Then we'll build something new," he said simply. "Sarah, I'm 43 years old. I've buried a wife, built a ranch, earned respect, and none of it, has made me as happy as these past weeks with you. If I have to choose between their approval and your presence, it's no choice at all. But the ranch is just land and cattle without someone to share it with." He took her hands, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "I told them you could stay as long as you choose. So choose. Sarah, choose to stay and fight alongside me. Choose to let me court you properly, in the open, no matter what they say. Choose to trust that what we're building is stronger than their small-minded prejudice." Sarah looked into his weathered face, seeing the determination there, the hope, the fear of another loss. This man who'd seemed so strong and self-contained needed her as much as she needed him. "They'll make our lives very difficult," she warned. "Our lives," he repeated, a smile ghosting across his lips. "I like the sound of that. People will be cruel, to both of us. People are often cruel. That doesn't mean they win." Sarah felt her resolve weakening. "I'm frightened. Samuel, not for me. I've faced worse. But for you. You have so much to lose. And so much to gain," he countered. "Sarah, do you care for me?" The simple question undid her. "You know I do. More than I should. More than is wise." "Then stay, fight with me. Let me prove that love is stronger than prejudice." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissing each palm. "Please." The word broke her. This proud man, who never asked for anything, was asking for her. How could she refuse? "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay. But Samuel, we must be even more careful now. Any excuse they can find will be hard to find," he finished. "I've already spoken to Mary and Jim. You'll move into their cottage. They have an extra room. It's only 50 yards from the main house, but it will stop any talk of impropriety. And I've sent word to Judge Thornton about my intentions to court you formally, with marriage as the goal. Let them gossip about that." Sarah's eyes widened. "You've already— Did you think I'd let them chase you away without a fight?" His gray eyes were fierce. "Sarah, Windkeeper, I'm going to court you properly, in full view of the entire territory. And when you're ready, if you'll have me, I'm going to marry you in the church in town, with anyone who cares to attend watching. Let them see that love doesn't bow to their narrow conventions." "You're either very brave or very foolish," Sarah said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Both," Samuel admitted, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "But mostly, I'm just a man who's been given a second chance at happiness and refuses to let it slip away." He kissed her then, softly and sweetly, a promise sealed in the quiet of her little room. When they parted, both were breathless. "Pack your things," he said, "but pack them to move to Mary's cottage, not to leave. Tomorrow, we start fighting for our future." As he left, Sarah stood surrounded by her scattered belonging, her heart pounding with fear and hope in equal measure. The morning would bring new battles, new cruelties. But it would also bring Samuel's steady presence, his unwavering support, his love that saw her as worthy of any fight. She resumed packing, but now with a different purpose. Not retreat, but advance. Not surrender, but the first step in claiming a life she'd never dared dream possible. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. But Sarah no longer saw it as a threat. With Samuel beside her, even the harshest winter could be weathered. She was staying, and God help anyone who tried to drive her away from the man who'd chosen her above all else. Spring of 1883 arrived late and harsh. The winter snows gave way not to gentle rains, but to a drought that stretched across Wyoming territory like a curse. By May, the grass was brown and brittle, the streams running low, and every rancher in the region watched the sky with growing desperation. The broken wheel felt the strain like all the others. Samuel spent long days riding the range, searching for water sources that hadn't dried up, moving cattle to parcels of land that still held some green. Sarah worked alongside Mary and the hands, hauling water from the deepest wells, rationing supplies, maintaining hope in the face of mounting difficulties. But they faced challenges beyond the drought. True to their threats, the town's influential men had begun their campaign of isolation. Suppliers delayed orders or claimed shortages. The Cattlemen's Association had revoked Samuel's membership. When Sarah accompanied Mary to town now, more than half the merchants refused to serve them. "Let me go to Fort Laramie for supplies," Jim Douglas suggested one evening as they discussed the situation. It's a longer trip, but they'll trade with us there. Samuel nodded grimly. Take 2 wagons. Stock up on everything we might need for the next few months. Sarah watched the worry lines deepen around his eyes. The financial pressure was mounting, paying cash for everything, traveling farther for supplies, losing access to shared resources other ranchers took for granted, all because of her. Stop that, Samuel said quietly, reading her expression. I see you blaming yourself again. They were sitting on the porch of the main house, maintaining proper distance but allowing themselves this moment of companionship as the sun set over the parched land. How can I not? Sarah replied. Your life was simpler before. My life was empty before. He corrected firmly. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Even if we lose everything else, having you here, building this future together, it's worth any price. His public courtship of her had been steadfast and proper. He visited her at Mary's cottage each evening, always with the older couple present. On Sundays, he escorted her to church, ignoring the whispers and turned backs. He'd even hosted a small dinner party, inviting Judge Thornton and a few other open-minded souls, presenting Sarah as his intended bride to those willing to accept it. But the drought was testing everyone's resolve. One scorching afternoon in June, Sarah was working in the kitchen garden, trying to save what vegetables she could with carefully rationed water, when she heard a commotion from the direction of the main corral. Angry voices, the sound of horses. She ran toward the noise, finding a crowd of ranch hands gathered. In the center, Samuel faced off against Harold Morrison and a group of riders from neighboring ranches. Damned water rights clearly state, Morrison was shouting. The water rights give us access to Willow Creek on our property, Samuel replied, his voice deadly calm. Always have. That was before you decided to harbor undesirables. Morrison spat. The Cattlemen's Association has voted. Ranches that don't uphold community standards forfeit their claims to shared water access. Sarah's blood ran cold. Willow Creek was one of the few water sources still flowing. Without it, they'd have to drive the cattle miles to water them, an impossible task with reduced manpower. That's not legal, Jim Douglas protested. Those water rights were established by territorial law. Take it up with the judge, Morrison sneered. Oh, wait, the circuit judge is my brother-in-law. Good luck with that. Samuel took a step forward, and every hand tensed. Sarah had never seen him truly angry before, but now his face was dark with rage. Get off my land, he said, each word precise as a bullet. And if any of you set foot on Broken Wheel property again, I'll shoot first and ask questions later. Big talk from a man who'll be broke by winter, Morrison taunted. When your cattle start dying of thirst, remember you chose this. You chose her over everything. After they left, Samuel stood rigid, staring at the dust cloud of their departure. The hands dispersed quietly, but Sarah saw the doubt in some faces. How long would they stay loyal when the ranch itself was threatened? That night, Sarah made a decision. After the evening meal, instead of retiring to Mary's cottage, she sought out Samuel in his study. He was bent over ledgers, calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to add up to survival. We need to talk, she said from the doorway. He looked up, and the defeat in his eyes nearly broke her. If you're going to try to leave again. No. She entered and closed the door behind her. Propriety be damned. I'm going to help. Samuel, my mother's people, the Shoshone. They know this land better than anyone. They know where to find water when the streams fail, how to survive drought. I can reach out to them. Samuel's expression shifted to concern. Sarah, you haven't been back to the tribe since my parents died. I know, but some will remember me. And right now, their knowledge could save the Broken Wheel. I won't have you begging on my behalf. Our behalf, she corrected, moving closer. You said we're building a future together. That means we fight together too. My people have been surviving on this land for generations. Let me use that knowledge. Samuel studied her for a long moment, then rose and pulled her into his arms. They stood there, holding each other, drawing strength from the contact. All right, he murmured into her hair. "What do you need?" The next morning, Sarah set out with old Pete and 2 pack horses laden with trade goods, cloth, tools, coffee, sugar, things that would show respect and good faith. The journey to the Shoshone camp took most of the day, following paths she remembered from childhood. As they crested the final ridge, Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of the teepees arranged along a creek bed that still held water. Children played in the dust. Women worked hides. Men tended horses. It was achingly familiar and utterly foreign after her years away. The scouts had seen them coming. Of course, by the time they reached the camp's edge, a delegation waited. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized her mother's cousin, Joseph Birdsong, now a respected elder. "Sarah Windkeeper," he said in Shoshone, his weathered face unreadable. "We heard you had forgotten your people." "I never forgot," she replied in the same language, dismounting slowly. "But grief and survival took me down a different path. And now that path leads back to us because you need something." His tone was neutral, but she heard the challenge beneath. "Yes," she said simply, meeting his eyes. "I come asking for help, not just for myself, but for the ranch that gave me shelter, and the man who—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The man who sees me as a person of worth, not as something less than human." Joseph studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Your mother would be proud. You've learned to survive in their world without losing yourself. Come, we'll talk." The negotiations took hours. Sarah explained the situation, the drought, the persecution they faced. The elders listened, asked questions, debated among themselves. Finally, as the sun began to set, Joseph spoke for the council. "We will help," he said. "Not for the white rancher, but for you, daughter of our people. We'll show you the hidden springs, teach you the old ways of finding water, but there's a price." Sarah tensed. "What price?" "You must remember who you are. Visit us. Bring your children when they come. Teach them our language and ways. Don't let them grow up strangers to their blood." "Children." The word sent a flutter through her stomach. I promise." Joseph smiled again. "Good. Tomorrow, we'll send guides." The next weeks were a blur of activity. Shoshone guides led Samuel and his men to hidden springs and seasonal pools known only to those who'd walked this land for centuries. They taught techniques for finding water by reading the land, following animal trails, recognizing the plants that grew near underground streams. Not all the ranch hands were comfortable working alongside Indians, and 2 more quit. But those who stayed began to see the wisdom in the old ways. Young Danny proved especially eager to learn. Forming a friendship with one of the younger guides, the Broken Wheels cattle survived where others began to fail. Word spread that Carter had gone native. But when Morrison's prize bull died of thirst, and the Triple Creek lost a quarter of their herd, the sneers began to ring hollow. One evening, as Sarah returned from checking the vegetable garden, now thriving thanks to an irrigation system based on traditional methods, she found Samuel waiting on the porch with a strange expression. "What is it?" she asked, immediately concerned. He held up a letter. "From Judge Thornton. He's been reviewing the water rights issue. Says Morrison's brother-in-law overstepped his authority. We have legal grounds to challenge the association's decision." Hope bloomed in her chest. "That's wonderful." "There's more." Samuel's eyes were bright with something she couldn't name. "He also says he'd be honored to officiate at our wedding, whenever we're ready. In fact, he's already reserved the church in Cheyenne for the last Saturday in August." Sarah's breath caught. They'd spoken of marriage, but always as something distant, to be considered when the current troubles passed. Samuel. He set the letter aside and took her hands. "I know we said we'd wait until things were settled, but Sarah, if this drought has taught me anything, it's that we can't wait for perfect conditions. We have to seize happiness when we find it." He dropped to one knee right there on the porch, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Sarah Windkeeper, will you marry me?" Not someday, not when the drought ends or the town accepts us, but next month. Will you stand with me before God and everyone and declare that we belong to each other?" Inside the box was a ring unlike any she'd seen, a band of silver set with a piece of turquoise, the sacred stone of her people. "Where did you?" "Your cousin Joseph helped me find it," Samuel admitted. "Said it belonged to your grandmother. I wanted you to have something that honored both sides of who you are." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she looked at this man who'd given up so much for her, who saw her heritage not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to celebrate. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Samuel Carter, I'll marry you, before the drought ends, before the town accepts us, before any of it, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, there in full view of anyone who cared to look, and for the first time since the troubles began. Sarah felt they might actually survive this, not just the drought, but all of it. They had water, they had allies in unexpected places, and most importantly, they had each other. The summer was far from over, and challenges remained. But as Sarah stood in Samuel's arms, wearing her grandmother's turquoise and feeling the solid strength of the man who'd chosen her above all else, she knew they'd already won the only battle that truly mattered. The Saturday of the Cattlemen's Association meeting dawned clear and hot. Sarah stood before the mirror in Mary's cottage, adjusting the new dress Samuel had insisted on ordering from Denver, a deep blue that complemented her coloring, modest but well-made. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her hair. "You look beautiful, dear," Mary said from the doorway. "They won't know what hit them." Today, Samuel would stand before the assembled ranchers and townspeople to formally announce their engagement and upcoming wedding. It was a declaration of war as much as love, and they both knew it. The meeting was held in the town hall, a grand name for what was essentially a large wooden building with benches and a raised platform at one end. By the time Sarah arrived with Samuel, Mary, and Jim, the hall was packed. She felt every eye turned toward them as they entered, heard the whispers rise like a wave. Samuel's hand found hers, steady and reassuring. "Ready?" he murmured. "No," she admitted, "but I'm here anyway." They took seats near the front, Sarah keeping her eyes forward despite the weight of stares boring into her back. The meeting began with the usual business: cattle prices, railroad negotiations, range disputes. But tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, Harold Morrison stood. "Before we conclude, there's the matter of membership standards to discuss. The floor recognizes Mr. Morrison," the chairman said reluctantly. Morrison moved to the platform with the confidence of a man certain of victory. "Gentlemen, we've built something fine here in Wyoming Territory. A civilization based on Christian values, hard work, and proper social order. But that foundation is being threatened." Murmurs of agreement rippled through certain sections of the crowd. "When we allow the mixing of races, when we accept degradation of moral standards, we risk everything our fathers built. I move that the Cattlemen's Association adopt new membership requirements. Specifically, that members must uphold community standards in their personal lives, including proper marriage and household arrangements." "Define proper," Samuel called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Morrison's smile was cold. "Marriage between those of the same race and standing, as God intended. Households that don't invite scandal or lower property values." "You mean households that don't employ Indians?" Samuel said flatly. "If the shoe fits." Morrison's supporters chuckled. Samuel rose slowly, and the room fell silent. Sarah wanted to pull him back, to flee this place, but she forced herself to remain still. "I have something to say," Samuel announced. "You're not a member anymore." "Carter," Morrison sneered, "you have no standing here. I'm still a rancher in this territory, and I'll be heard." Samuel moved toward the platform with the same deliberate stride he used when approaching an unbroken horse. "Yes, I employ Sarah Windkeeper. Yes, I've grown to respect and admire her. And yes, Harold, since you seem so interested in my personal affairs, I'll share them with everyone." He turned to face the assembled crowd. And Sarah saw the moment he spotted friendly faces among the hostile ones. Judge Thornton. Several smaller ranchers who'd always respected him. Even Reverend Mason looking uncomfortable but present. 6 weeks from today, Samuel said clearly, I will marry Sarah Windkeeper in the church in Cheyenne. Judge Thornton will officiate. Any of you who wish to witness the union of two people who've found love despite the odds are welcome to attend. The eruption was immediate. Shouts of outrage. A few scattered applause quickly drowned out. Chairs scraping as people stood. Sarah saw Mrs. Morrison's face contort with fury, while Helena clutched her chest as if she might faint. You can't, Morrison roared. It's unnatural, it's legal. Judge Thornton interrupted, standing. I've researched the territorial laws thoroughly. There's no prohibition against such a marriage. Legal don't make it right, someone shouted. And your opinion doesn't make it wrong, Samuel shot back. Sarah Windkeeper has shown more courage, grace, and Christian charity than most in this room. She's helped save my ranch through this drought with knowledge your ignorance would have us dismiss. She's faced your hatred with dignity, and she's agreed to be my wife despite knowing the difficulties it will bring. Then you're both fools, Morrison spat. No decent person will associate with you. No bank will extend credit. No merchant will trade with you. You'll be outcasts. We already are, Samuel said quietly. And somehow his calm was more powerful than any shout. You've done your best to destroy us, Harold, but we're still standing. The broken wheel is surviving the drought while your cattle die. We've found water you couldn't. We've made allies you didn't expect. And we've found something worth more than your approval. We've found each other. He looked directly at Sarah then, and she stood, her legs shaky but her resolve firm. She walked to join him, taking his offered hand. I was nobody to most of you, she said, her voice starting soft but growing stronger. The Indian girl, the servant, something less than human, but Samuel saw me. He saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself. You think your hatred will break us? I survived the loss of my family, survived alone for years, survived your cruelty, and now I have someone who stands beside me. Your disapproval is nothing compared to what I've already endured. Brave words, Morrison sneered. Let's see how brave you are when what? Samuel's voice turned dangerous. Choose your next words very carefully, Harold, because if you're about to threaten my future wife, we'll settle this outside, here and now. Gentlemen, please. Reverend Mason finally found his voice. This is a place of civic gathering, not a barroom. Mr. Morrison, your motion has been made. Let's vote and be done with it. The vote was predictable. The new membership standards passed easily, formally excluding Samuel from the association. But as people began to file out, something unexpected happened. Thomas Garrett, who owned a small spread to the south, approached Samuel. Carter, that took guts. My water's holding out, but barely. Maybe you could have Miss Windkeeper's people take a look? I'd pay fair. One by one, a handful of other ranchers approached. Not many, but enough. Men who cared more about survival than social standards. Men who'd watched the broken wheel thrive while others struggled and wondered if pride was worth dying of thirst. Outside the hall, as they prepared to leave, Tommy Morrison blocked their path. His friends flanked him, all liquored up despite the early hour. You think you've won something? Tommy slurred. You've just painted a target on your backs. Tommy, go home, Samuel said tiredly. You're drunk. Not too drunk to recognize trash when I see it. He leered at Sarah. Though I admit, for an Indian, she's not bad to look at. Maybe after you're done with her. He never finished the sentence. Samuel's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dust. His friends started forward, but stopped when they saw Jim Douglas and several broken wheel hands emerge from the crowd, ready to back their boss. Anyone else have something to say about my fiancé? Samuel asked calmly, rubbing his knuckles. Harold Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. You struck my son. Your son insulted my future wife. He's lucky that's all I did. Samuel helped Sarah into the wagon. Keep him away from us, Harold, This is your only warning." As they drove away, Sarah felt a mix of pride, fear, and something else. A fierce joy at being publicly claimed, defended, chosen. The road ahead would be hard, but she was no longer walking it alone. "Your hand," she said softly, noticing Samuel's scraped knuckles. "Worth it," he replied, then glanced at her. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." "What Tommy said? I've heard worse." She took his injured hand gently in hers. "But I've never had anyone defend me like that before." "Get used to it," Samuel said firmly. "As long as I draw breath, no one speaks to you that way without answering to me." Back at the ranch, word of the confrontation spread quickly. The hands who'd witnessed it told the others. And by evening meal, Sarah noticed a shift in how they looked at her. Not just as Samuel's woman, but as someone he'd publicly fight for. In the rough code of the frontier, that meant something. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed in Mary's cottage, she reflected on the day's events. They'd lost the association battle, but perhaps won something more important. A declaration that their love wouldn't hide in shadows, wouldn't bow to prejudice. And they'd gained unexpected allies, people willing to choose practicality over prejudice. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Samuel standing there with a small bouquet of wildflowers, prairie roses, and Indian paintbrush. "I realized," he said almost shyly, "that in all this mess, I haven't courted you properly. A woman deserves flowers from her intended, even if he has to defend her honor with his fists in between romantic gestures." Sarah laughed, accepting the bouquet. "Most unusual courtship I've ever heard of. For a most unusual woman." His expression grew serious. "Sarah, after today, there's no going back. They'll make our lives as difficult as possible. If you want to reconsider," she silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "Samuel Carter, I stood in that hall today and watched you risk everything for me. I watched you strike a man for insulting me. I heard you tell the entire town that I'm worth more than their approval. Do you really think I'd walk away now?" He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Just making sure, because in 6 weeks, I intend to make you my wife in front of God and whoever else shows up, and after that, let them all go to hell." "Language, Mr. Carter," she teased. What would Reverend Mason say? Probably that I'm a fool in love. He smiled, and he'd be right. Standing there in the doorway, holding wildflowers picked by the hands of a man who'd chosen her above all else, Sarah felt the last of her walls crumble. She was loved, publicly, fiercely, completely loved. And maybe, just maybe, that love would be enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. 6 weeks, she said softly. I can hardly wait. Neither can I, Samuel admitted. Neither can I. He kissed her good night, properly, chastely, but with a promise of passion held in check, and walked back to the main house. Sarah watched him go, then looked up at the star-filled sky. Her mother's spirit was up there somewhere, along with her father's and brother's. She hoped they could see her now, see that their daughter had found her place at last. The town might rage, the drought might continue, troubles would surely come, but Sarah Windkeeper, soon to be Sarah Carter, would face them all with her head held high and her hand in that of a man who thought her worth any fight. She went to bed that night with wildflowers in a jar by her bedside and hope blooming in her heart like prairie roses after rain. The rains came on a Tuesday morning in late August, 3 days before the wedding. Sarah woke to the sound of thunder rolling across the plains and the blessed scent of wet earth. She rushed to the window of Mary's cottage, hardly believing what she saw. Real rain, steady and soaking, the kind that would replenish streams and turn brown grass green again. "Mary," she called, laughing and crying at once. "Mary, come see." The older woman appeared, took one look outside, and promptly burst into tears of joy. "Thank the Lord," she whispered. "We're saved." Across the ranch, Sarah could hear whoops and hollers as the hands realized what was happening. She dressed quickly and ran outside, not caring that she was getting soaked. The drought that had threatened to destroy everything was finally breaking. Samuel emerged from the main house, his face turned up to the sky, rain streaming down his weathered features. When he saw Sarah, his face broke into the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen. Without hesitation, she ran to him, and he caught her up in his arms, spinning her around as the life-giving rain poured down on them both. "It's a sign," he said, setting her down but keeping her close. "Even the heavens are blessing our union. Or perhaps the spirits were just waiting for us to prove ourselves," Sarah replied, thinking of her mother's stories about rain following great trials. The next days were a whirlwind of preparation. The ranch, revitalized by the rain, burst with activity. The surviving cattle grew stronger. The grass began to show hints of green. And even the most skeptical hands admitted that maybe the boss's unusual romance had brought them luck. Sarah's wedding dress arrived from Denver, not white, which would have been presumptuous for a working woman, but a soft sage green that complemented her coloring perfectly. Mary and several of the ranch wives who'd remained friendly helped with alterations and preparations. The night before the wedding, Joseph Birdsong arrived with a delegation from the Shoshone camp. "We come to see our daughter married," he announced, presenting Sarah with a traditional beaded necklace. "Your mother would want you to wear this." Sarah touched the intricate beadwork with trembling fingers. I wasn't sure if you'd come." "You kept your promise." Joseph said simply, "You remembered who you are. We honor that." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the air clean. The church in Cheyenne was modest but respectable, and as Sarah arrived with Mary and Jim Douglas, she was amazed to see it nearly full, not just with friendly faces. Judge Thornton, Reverend Mason, the smaller ranchers who'd become allies, but with curious townspeople drawn by the scandal and spectacle of it all. There were hostile faces, too. The Morrisons sat in a back pew like carrion birds waiting for disaster. Several proper ladies whispered behind fans, but Sarah found she didn't care. Today, she would marry the man who'd chosen her above all else. Samuel waited at the altar, resplendent in his best suit, his gray eyes bright with emotion when he saw her. Jim Douglas walked her down the aisle, having offered when he learned she had no male relatives present. The Shoshone delegation sat proudly on one side, a powerful reminder that Sarah came from a people with their own dignity and traditions. Judge Thornton performed the ceremony with grave dignity, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Samuel Carter and Sarah Windkeeper, two souls who have found in each other a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle." When he asked if anyone objected, there was a tense moment of silence. Harold Morrison half rose from his seat, but his wife pulled him back down, hissing something about not making a spectacle. The moment passed. Samuel's vows were simple but powerful. "Sarah, you've brought light back into my life when I thought I'd live in darkness forever. You've shown me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your world, but about building a new world together. I promise to stand beside you, protect you, and cherish you all the days of my life." Sarah's voice was steady as she spoke her own vows. "Samuel, you saw me when I was invisible. You gave me shelter when I had none, respect when others offered only scorn, and love when I'd forgotten what it felt like to be valued. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes, to be your partner in all things, and to love you with all the strength I possess." When Judge Thornton pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to many eyes, including some who'd come to scoff, as they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Carter. Applause broke out from their supporters, drowning out any mutters of disapproval. The reception was held at the Broken Wheel, under the open sky that had finally blessed them with rain. Tables groaned with food, traditional American fare alongside dishes Sarah had learned from her mother. The Shoshone delegation performed a blessing dance, their drums and songs adding a depth and richness to the celebration that no church organ could match. Thomas Garrett raised a toast, To Sam and Sarah Carter, they've shown us that courage comes in many forms, and that water isn't the only thing worth fighting drought for. May their love continue to bring rain to dry places. Even some who'd opposed the match found themselves swept up in the joy of the occasion. Sarah overheard Mrs. Whitmore admit to her husband, "I still don't approve, but I've never seen Sam look so happy, not even with Ellen." As evening fell, Chinese lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Sarah found a quiet moment to stand with Samuel on the porch of what was now their home. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," she assured him. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He pulled her close. "We've got a long road ahead. Sarah, the town won't accept us overnight. There'll be more challenges." "I know." She rested her head against his shoulder. "But we've survived drought and hatred and isolation. We've found water in dry places and allies in unexpected corners. Together, we can face anything." "Together," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. The party continued late into the night, a celebration not just of a wedding but of resilience, of love that refused to bow to prejudice, of the possibility that people could change and grow. As Sarah danced with her husband under stars that no longer seemed distant and cold, but close and blessing, she thought of her parents. They would be proud. She knew. She'd found a place where she belonged not by hiding who she was, but by standing proud in her truth. She'd found a man who loved her not despite her heritage, but complete with it. And she'd helped build a bridge, however fragile, between two worlds that usually stood apart. The next morning, Sarah woke in the main house for the first time as its mistress. The room she'd once cleaned as a servant was now hers to share with Samuel. As sunlight streamed through windows she'd once washed, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. Samuel stirred beside her, reaching out to pull her close. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." "Good morning, Mr. Carter." She smiled against his shoulder. "What shall we do today?" "Today," he said thoughtfully, "we start building our future. The drought's broken. We've got contracts with ranchers who need water wisdom. And most importantly, I've got you. I'd say things are looking up." Sarah rose and went to the window, looking out over the Broken Wheel Ranch. Her home now, truly and legally. The grass was already greening, the cattle growing strong, the future bright with possibility. In the distance, she could see riders approaching, more ranchers seeking help, perhaps, or friends coming to offer congratulations. "You know what I was thinking?" Samuel joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What's that?" "Maybe it's time to bring in more hands. Young Danny's been talking about his sister back east, how she's looking for work, and Joe Birdsong mentioned his nephew needs employment. The Broken Wheel could be a place where anyone willing to work hard is welcome, regardless of where they come from." Sarah turned in his arms, seeing the vision he was painting, a ranch that could be a model for what the territory could become, where merit mattered more than race, where different peoples could work side by side. "That's a beautiful dream," she said. "It's a practical one, too." Samuel pointed out with a grin. "Your people's knowledge saved us. Imagine what else we could learn, what else we could build, if we're open to it." "The town won't like it. The town will come around or be left behind. Progress doesn't wait for permission." Sarah kissed him then, pouring all her love and hope into the gesture. When they parted, she whispered, "I love you, Samuel Carter, and I love you, Sarah Carter, forever and always." As they stood together in their bedroom, the morning sun painting everything golden, Sarah knew that their story was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, children to raise with love and wisdom, a ranch to run, minds to change one interaction at a time, but they would face it all together. Proof that love could bloom even in the harshest ground. The girl who'd once lived in a tent, believing she wasn't beautiful enough, wasn't good enough, had become a woman who knew her worth. And the lonely rancher who'd thought his heart died with his first wife had discovered it had only been waiting for the right person to bring it back to life. Outside, the Broken Wheel Ranch bustled with new life and possibility. And in the main house, Samuel and Sarah Carter began their first full day as husband and wife, ready to face whatever the future might bring. Their love had already survived drought and prejudice. Everything else would be easy by comparison. In the kitchen that evening, as Sarah prepared supper with Mary's help, the older woman had insisted on staying on to help, claiming Sarah would need assistance, managing that stubborn man. She hummed one of her mother's songs. The words were Shoshone, but the melody was universal, a song of home, of belonging, of love that transcends all boundaries. And for the first time in her life, Sarah truly understood what every word meant. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West, where love conquered the harsh realities of drought and the even harsher prejudice of society. If you're enjoying these tales of romance and resilience from America's frontier, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We love connecting with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Samuel's journey. What touched your heart most about their story?